Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Survival Horror Guide, a series where we play and then analyze survival horror games. Then we rate them on their fear factor and give them an overall score. And once that's all said and done, we throw it to the series' totally arbitrary rating system and see how it ranks against the competition in the overall survival horror compendium. And so, for the very first episode, episode 1 of the Survival Horror Guide, we are taking a look at Dead Space 3. Which might seem like a strange pick, but it's actually just because I just finished playing it for the very first time. Gotta strike while the iron is hot. Let's do it. Speaking of which, you can actually catch my entire Dead Space 3 playthrough over on the Let's Play channel, but now let's dive into this controversial sequel. Dead Space 3, the final game in this ill-fated series. Between the years of 2008 to 2013, Visceral Games, the developer, had put out 3 mainline Dead Space games and a spin-off light gun game, Dead Space Extraction. It's a whole lot of Dead Space and not a whole lot of time. Being under the thumb of EA, man, not exactly an enviable position. But still, given that only 2 years really separate the releases of Dead Space 2 and 3, what they were able to accomplish was fairly impressive. The game is still very polished, just albeit with some questionable decisions in game design. And considering that this was actually the very first time that I had ever played through this game, I guess my expectations, they were a bit stunted given the game's reputation. But to my surprise, I still enjoyed my time with it. Dead Space 3 picks back up with the series protagonist Isaac Clarke. He's fallen on some pretty rough times. Clearly all of the trauma from the previous games has taken its toll on him. And the world of Dead Space, by this point in the story, is a much different place. Some people have even taken to worshipping the markers, which are the zombifying, necromorph-inducing ancient relics that caused the events of the previous games. The group that worships them are called the Unitologists, led by this douche named Danik, the human antagonist in the game. When we take control of Isaac, it starts off with a sequence that takes place on a lunar colony where Isaac and Carver, who we'll get to in a sec, do battle against the Unitologists, human enemies, with cover-based shooting. It honestly was a bit jarring because I wasn't exactly expecting to play Gears of War. It felt just strangely paced as well. Like, 1 second Isaac is just chilling in his dingy apartment, and let's just be clear, this apartment is supposed to look sad and depressing. But look at the view, man, with a bit of elbow grease, some TLC, this would be a dope pad. And next thing you know, we're introduced to Norton, a bigger douche than Danik and Carver, and we're off to the races in the middle of a gunfight within minutes. It felt off. I think back to the first game, which really had like this masterful, slow build up to the tension. This one just cuts straight to a gunfight, straight to the action. Action. That is the key word here because it really feels like that's what the focus of this game is. Like, there was a considerable amount of action in the first game, but it complemented the scares and the horror, whereas this one, it almost feels like it replaces it. This is further emphasized with a focus on co-op. Now, I got no problem with co-op, but it just feels odd where the first game previously had such a focus on the feeling of isolation, such an emphasis on that, to now where you have like a fully co-op campaign beginning to end. It really throws those previously established themes out the window. And I played this whole thing solo, and from my understanding, playing co-op has additional story beats for Carver. There are moments, especially near the end, where Isaac and Carver would share like some dialogue, some heart-to-heart moments. But seeing as how I never got those extra story beats, I was just kind of like, oh wait, Carver's here? Wait, am I supposed to care about him? In single player, Carver's missing for almost the entire campaign, except for the very beginning and the very end, when we're supposed to have like this emotional connection that we just never got a chance to establish. Another one of the major changes are the weapons. There's a big emphasis on customization and crafting, really making your weapon your own. Now, this was both a good thing and a bad thing. I think the intent was to give players more freedom in customizing their arsenal, making some really badass stuff. And while it kind of did, what ended up happening is I'd craft a single weapon, pour all of my resources and upgrades into making that single weapon as good as it can be, and then using that for the entire game. See, in previous games, you had the plasma cutter, the line gun, force gun, pulse rifle, all these unique weapons, and what made it more difficult was they all had their own different types of ammo. In survival horror, we knew what we were getting ourselves into, where you'd find yourself in a tricky situation and you'd only have ammo for a gun that you're not familiar with. Tough shit. That's the way it goes, man. It would kind of force you to play outside of your comfort zone at times, whereas this game has one universal ammo type that works for all weapons. So, you pour all of your upgrades and resources into that single gun, never need to worry about ammo, never leave your comfort zone. It made combat encounters feel very easy and just not as intense. So adding all of these options and these upgrades with, the intent of giving players more freedom, ultimately it kind of shoehorns you into using the same weapon the whole game. At least that was my experience. Throughout the course of the game, you spend most of your time in 3 or 4 different locales. The first being the lunar colony, which I actually thought was the most interesting. Next, you're in space, orbiting around a planet with a bunch of debris and other ships, which you can actually explore. This was also a fairly cool setting. And then finally, we spend a great deal of time on this snowy ice planet, which, I'm gonna be honest, I was not super crazy about. Just aesthetically, it's not that interesting. Like, it's dead space. We can go to all kinds of crazy planets, but we've settled on an ice planet with various military bases and structures. It kind of gets a bit boring. And honestly, horror games really rely a lot on ambience and setting and atmosphere, so I think this does end up hurting the game. Now, I know I'm saying a lot of bad things about the game, but here's another one. I was also disappointed with the necromorphs. Like, there's definitely a lot of familiar enemies from the previous games in this one. There's new changes to some of them, and there's this new larger necromorph enemy that you fight a few times, but other than that, I don't think any of the enemies will really surprise you in this game. It's a lot of the same. But despite some of this game's missteps and veering into territory that is detrimental to what made the series great in the first place, Dead Space 3 is still a cut above most horror games. The guns feel great, the necromorphs are as terrifying as ever, and despite the eye-roll-worthy human drama, most of the game is spent with Isaac doing what he does best, stomping necromorphs and fixing shit with kinesis. A lot of the core is still intact. Finishing this game for the first time was also kind of bittersweet because we know the original team that worked on this series, Visceral Games, they're no longer around. This truly is the end of Isaac's story, and I will say they do him justice, and by the time the credits rolled, I was satisfied with how they wrapped up his arc. So it's over. 7 years later, I finally finished Dead Space 3. On the fear factor scale, this game is a 5. It's not super scary, and we're so damn armed to the teeth the enemies don't pose any real threat. On an overall score, I give this game a 7.5. Despite what some people may have you believe, it's not like a 3 out of 10 or anything like that. It just isn't. And now let's take it to the series' totally arbitrary rating system, where it's gonna be number 1, because it's the first game on the board. Enjoy your time at the top while it lasts. That is it for the very first episode of the Survival Horror Guide. Let me know what you guys thought about it, and also let me know what games you'd like to see covered on this series in the future. Of course, hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching this one. Peace.